South Africa's budget deficit has widened further in August and September. Now, that's compared to a year ago as government expenditure continues to grow faster than revenue. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is concerned about the financial situation. Wits University's Professor Alex van den Heever says South Africa's fiscal crisis has likely been exaggerated, and he joins us now to elaborate on this. Very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you for joining us. Very strong sentiments there you've given us. In fact, you go as far as saying that this exaggeration has been facilitated to cover up for corruption.
Yes, I would argue that to a large extent we are dealing with a situation where fiscal discipline has to a degree declined, but to a large extent that weakness in the fiscal position has been policy induced, and it is largely been done to allow expenditure to continue where it shouldn't, and to where austerity is introduced to actually harm the public. So what you're seeing at the end of the day is an argument for protecting the politically connected, but at the expense of the vulnerable in South Africa. And I think that this is an important discussion to have, because we can't have a government who is essentially pretending to be fiscally responsible, whereas in fact they're the exact opposite.
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say as consumers, we also have been feeling the pinch in our pockets for a while now. The finance minister himself has said he's concerned and that he is going to consult with government about these issues. What kind of advice do you think that he should be getting, and what direction he should be taking to turn the situation around?
Well, I think that we have to look at the areas where government expenditure can be cut appropriately. So there are a number of things that were done this year that exacerbated the fiscal position, such as the wage agreements, which really shouldn't have gone through. They weren't affordable, and they were introduced in any case. But we also have a very substantial cabinet that is completely unnecessary, and a very substantial number of deputy ministers, a VIP protection service that is largely irrelevant. We've got lots of bloated administrations across the public sector, and we have state-owned enterprises that are led by poorly appointed people who are not really accountable, and that is having a detrimental effect on South Africa's economic growth, which in turn is reducing government revenue. So all of this is kind of on both the expenditure side and on the side of raising revenue is being hit. And government basically has to get serious at this point in addressing both of those aspects, the failing SOEs, and which in fact involves a systemic failure because of leadership and poor appointments, inappropriate political appointments, and systemic corruption. And also the protecting of people the political elite within the state. And so both basically have to be addressed.
Yeah. You mentioned the governance of state-owned enterprises. I mean, that has become a perennial, chronic governance issue that's been happening over the years as we see state-owned entities being bailed out. Now and again, the National Treasury also then proposing those drastic steps, some of which you've already alluded to. But there's been this argument that austerity measures do not really work. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so austerity measures which are essentially targeted at, huge services that we are providing to the public, such as healthcare, policing, and basic education. You can cut those budgets, you can try, but in essence it will be very difficult to reduce expenditure in them because they are necessary. But what government is rather soft on doing is cutting where it can cut. But at this point in time, the fiscal position is not so dire that government can't essentially incrementally move its way out of this position. And the fiscally weak position we're in at the moment has been largely growing since 2008. And that's where we've seen both the increase in government debt and over expenditure and bloated expenditure on government wages, salaries and wages, often through many appointments who are not necessary, and through wage increases that are problematic. And those basically crowd out the necessary expenditures of government. Then on the state-owned enterprises side, our investments that should be growing the economy have not been productive. And they've not been productive because the people driving those investments have not been capable. We've created SOEs which are no longer capable organizations. And as a consequence, they can't solve the complex problems that they face. And so they gradually deteriorate. So when we look at the other investment expenditures, roads, rail, our logistics services, our energy system and infrastructure, and water systems, suddenly they're all simultaneously failing. And this is something that happens over time through a combination of poor leadership and failed coherent investment. Projects don't follow through. Corrupt people are appointed to carry out projects. They get paid whether or not they do their work. And this is happening with billions and billions and billions of rands in South Africa. And this is our problem. That has to be turned around. But what everybody is identifying at this point is it appears as though government doesn't have the political will to actually deal with the core issues and rather tiptoe around the edges. And I think that's probably what we're going to see more of going forward. Not looking at addressing the substantive issues and trying to find ways of avoiding dealing with the elephants in the room.
You've raised very important key factors there, Prof. And you'll tell me if this is of any material consequence, the collection of revenue from SARS and how it is managed. The institution seems to be going through some governance issues as well that has been trying to be fixed. The management of that revenue collection, does it have any consequence to the fiscal deficit that we see happening?
We had problems with revenue collection during the sort of formal state capture period organized and arranged by Zuma. But there's been a rectification of leadership aspects within SARS, but that doesn't really help if the economy goes into decline. So if we've got stage 6 load shedding happening systematically, which we've had for a considerable period of time, it might be less now, but it has been for a considerable period of time, and where we have our logistics services collapse, which means that our exports don't reach the harbors, then government revenue is automatically cut because profits are down, companies don't produce, the economy is hamstrung. So essentially for us to get government revenue in, we need a functioning and growing economy. And what we're seeing is that government itself has actually destroyed the institutions that are critical to having a growing economy. And this is why we really have to focus on the core problems, because restoring governance, not just to SARS can try and collect what it can, but if the economy is not going to work, we're not going to get a lot in. So we've got to do more.
Absolutely, Professor. Thank you for that comprehensive take. We certainly appreciate it. Wits University, Professor Alex van der Heever.